Alec, thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited to get this opportunity to chat with you. Alec Dunn is a writer, artist, and printer based in Portland, Oregon. He has designed book and record covers, political graphics, punk flyers, and is a member of the Just Seeds Artist Cooperative. Since 2010, he's been working as co-editor of Signal, a journal of international political graphics and culture. Alec's article, which is called Hope in the Midst of Apathy, Liberation Magazine, and the cover art of Vera B. Williams, recently appeared in Signal '08, and his writing, as well as a selection of Vera Williams liberation covers, appear in our exhibition at Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center, which is called Vera B. Williams Stories, 8 Decades of Politics and Picture Making. Today, I'm really excited for this chance to chat with you, Alec, about all of the fascinating connections between BMC and the Liberation Magazine project.
Great.
So I wanted to start off, Alec, if you could just tell our audience a little bit about what exactly was Liberation Magazine and what did it kind of stand for?
Sure. Liberation Magazine was a magazine of the pacifist, non-Marxist left. It existed between 1956 and 1977. I think they did, I don't know how many issues they did, honestly. They did over 100 issues. It usually came out, I think, seasonally, sometimes more often, depending, I think, on content. So that's kind of a broad overview of what Liberation was. It was definitely rooted in organizers who had met during conscientious objection to military service, people who were conscientious objectors. Many of them were imprisoned together in World War II, and continued struggles against militarism and violence following that, and also had fairly deep ties into early civil rights organizing, particularly, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, with Bayard Rustin, and some of the other folks that were involved with Liberation. And I should also say it was had a lot of roots in faith-based organizing, kind of like a radical Christianity, and that ties into groups like the Catholic Worker, but also more radical groups of the Quakers.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for that overview sketch.
Sure.
So could you tell us a little bit about how Liberation was founded and how Black Mountain College actually kind of figures into that story in an interesting way, especially through two figures, which are Paul Goodman and Bayard Rustin?
So Liberation was founded in 1956. It was, I guess, in a series of publications that had been going on throughout the 40s and 50s of anti-militarism, nonviolent, direct action, people trying to organize. Liberation was seed funded by a group called the War Resisters League, which is still ongoing. And it had that organization kind of picked an initial editorial group from some War Resisters League and pacifist activists. And that group included A.J. Musty, who'd been a labor leader and radical, I don't know, I think he was maybe, well, I'm not going to say what denomination he was, but he had been a priest who'd been stepped down from the priesthood, some Christian denomination. So A.J. Musty, Bayard Rustin, Dave Dellinger, who'd been a conscientious objector and would later become a fairly well-known activist in the 60s and 70s. Roy Finch, who was an anarchist and also a conscientious objector and had helped start Pacifica Radio Network later. And Sidney Lenz. That was the initial editorial group. Sidney Lenz was also a radical labor leader, I think from Chicago, Detroit area. So that was the beginning. It was seed funded by the War Resisters League. Amongst that group, and its ties to Black Mountain, Paul Goodman, who was a writer and taught summer schools at Black Mountain, was one of the early writers on that and was certainly tied in with that group, both socially, politically, intellectually. And Bayard Rustin who, as I said, was one on the initial organizing committee for Liberation, was one of the initial editors, was a longtime civil rights organizer, had kind of come out of the radical Quaker pacifist left in the Northeast, and was instrumental in civil rights organizing. He, along with a group of others, participated in what was called the Journey of Reconciliation in 1947. And that was one of the first freedom rides to protest segregation on bus routes in the South. For that, the participants were arrested, spent time on chain gangs, and James Peck and Bayard Rustin, who were both activists on that group, stopped at Black Mountain College, I think on the return, and spoke about the project of the Freedom Rides and about their imprisonment. And that Vera Williams mentioned in her oral history with Connie Bostick was a very influential visitor for her during the summer that she spent there.
Right. So we'll talk about Vera in a minute, but so that's part of that connection is that Vera and Bayard Rustin had actually already met at Black Mountain College all those years ago.
Right. And had some ties to that. And then as well, the same with Paul Goodman, who Vera also mentions repeatedly as being very influential teacher there for her, and later with some of the projects they did with the Gate Hill Cooperative after Black Mountain College was influential on the design, architecturally, the physical design of the space, but also how they organize schools and meetings, and a lot of his kind of theories and thoughts about urban design and I don't know, group connectivity were very influential on how they did things.
So this is sort of where Vera comes into the picture. Could you tell us a little bit about Vera Baker Williams and her work with the magazine and how she kind of got involved? I'll say for our audience that, of course, Vera was a student at Black Mountain College and kind of became really integral to the BMC community in many ways, and was close friends and kind of collaborator with a number of the luminaries that we tend to focus on throughout the history of Black Mountain College, including John Cage and Merce Cunningham and Mary Caroline Richards and others, and started her own very interesting project called the Gate Hill Co-op. And so that kind of plays a role in this story as well. So Alec, if you could tell us a little bit about Vera and Liberation and how they kind of cross paths.
Sure. And we'll preface this, I'm not a deep Black Mountain scholar, so I know there's a lot of details, and I'm only speaking with a conditional amount of authority here, but she had come into Black Mountain, I think, in 1947. She was a young woman from New York City. She came from a Jewish family in New York City, radical leftist family. And I believe Black Mountain was really her first extensive time out of a city environment. And she talks quite lovingly about being in nature there and working with animals, and also just the intensive study of art, especially with the Alberses. I don't know how to say them plurally, Joseph and Annie Albers.
I think that's right.
And then also did develop, of course, friendships, as you said, with Merce Cunningham, John Cage, and I don't know, several other people. So when Black Mountain started kind of falling apart in the early 50s, Vera and her husband, Paul Williams, who was an architect at Black Mountain, purchased some land in the Hudson Valley in New York, north of New York City, I think about 40 miles north, and they called it the Gate Hill Cooperative. And that residents there also included John Cage, Merce Cunningham. Other names are escaping me currently, but a lot of notable Black Mountain alum went there, and it was set up along the same ideas as Black Mountain, as far as, you know, cooperative living and some experiments in organization, but obviously it wasn't a school. So it was more of an arts and crafts focused community, making space for people there to pursue their passions and raise children and grow food and live communally.
Right.
So I think I've lost the thread there, but so as far as that goes, so Vera, while at Gate Hill, was producing artwork for a magazine that was called Resistance. And that was I believe, printed at the Glen Gardner Commune, which is nearby in New Jersey. Resistance was an anarchist bimonthly. It was published by a man named David Wyke, who also had come out of this anti-militarist left. And there was a whole series of, as I said, small magazines like this that were called Resistance and Alternative, Direct Action. There was one called Why. And they would run for a few years and, I don't know, fold after that point. So Liberation, I think, sequentially was probably the last in that, what I consider that series of magazines. Maybe Resistance was second to last. Resistance was a little bit different than its predecessors in that it did have some great cover art, and I believe Vera did a lot of the cover art. There wasn't a lot of interior illustration there, but with that connection, she would go and work on printing those covers with Dave Dillinger and a man named Igal Rudenko, who had also been on the journey of reconciliation with Bayard Rustin. And when Resistance folded and Liberation started, she started contributing interior artwork to it. And then Paul Goodman did a cover article on Wilhelm Reich and asked if Vera could do the cover for that. And she went down and she did the cover for that. And I don't believe actually that's the first one. The first one she did was about a anti-nuclear protest, I think out of the Bikini Atoll. The Wilhelm Reich was shortly thereafter. It might have been the next issue. But those were the kind of early covers. She started making more covers as well as continuing to do interior illustrations. And then by 1958, so just 2 years after it started, she kind of became the exclusive cover artist for the next decade-ish. And she ended up doing 76 covers for them. By her son's account, who I talked to in researching the article, she had a heavy hand in being there for the printing. We'd go and travel and help with the printing. So it was a big process. Her artwork for the covers was, hopefully people will see the exhibition, but really ranged the gamut of really directly political stuff to, I don't know, more experimental work that played with pattern and light and then just kind of clever, I don't know, social commentary. A lot of her work was really funny if you look at it. And it was odd. It just did not fit in with what was considered political art at the time. Didn't really rest in what were major art trends at the time. You know, it really stood out. And I think when I had first seen Liberation in 2006 or something, I mean, it really stood out just because of its covers, because you pull up a cover and you'd be like, what is this magazine? It's crazy covers. And then as you go further, you're like, oh, this is all by one person. And that's how, at least I encountered it and how it unfolded for me. So I'm still going on the Vera here. I just have some examples. Let me try and share the screen.
Yeah, please.
So these are two covers from Resistance in its later years. I think this was the last year it existed in 1954. The covers weren't credited, so going through it, I'm not sure if these are by Vera Williams or not. The one on the right, I would probably lay money on. The trees and the little drawings of the figures behind the police really look like work she did later with Liberation. And then the one on the left was just of the same year and kind of looked like something she might do. I don't know. These, as I said, these weren't credited. Just found PDFs of the issues and yeah, there was no credit there. But they're really nice covers. And you know, in the realm of political publications, there had been kind of a probably, as there is now, a kind of a set look for, you know, what political art looked like, and often it was you know, people with fists, proud workers, and mothers with scarves, and beautiful young people fighting. And this kind of, you know, breaks the mold and definitely shows some real creativity.
Yeah, in your article, you talked a little bit about one of the interesting kind of formal qualities of the covers is how they really break out of the bounding box. And even the text, even the title of the magazine is like often part of the illustration. So I thought that was a really cool aspect.
Right. Yeah. These were the two, I guess, the first two covers. So January 1958 is the Wilhelm Reich one. So that is really the first. And then June 1958 is the one about the boat protesting the nuclear tests in the ocean. I really like this one. I think it shows a lot of whimsy. I mean, these kind of cityscape of file cabinets, and it just was she had a lot of kind of commentary on the kind of alienation of everyday life.
Totally. And Vera grew up, as we kind of discussed before, in a very urban environment. She grew up in the Bronx, New York, and then going to Black Mountain and seeing a totally different environment. So I definitely see how that comes into the covers a lot, this kind of alienation under technology and capitalism.
Right. And I think if you ever read Paul Goodman's work, which if you haven't, I would recommend, especially really enjoy his book with his brother called Communitas. It's very prescient and kind of far-reaching ideas about urban design and modern alienation. It's really good. And then just, some of the kind of humor here. And once again, just kind of the oddness of the covers of Liberation. So, I mean, this one is a picture of people on a subway, and it says the free democratic peoples exercising one of their privileges to ride together at 5 o'clock, enjoying the gaily colored art, which are just the advertisements above their head. And there's another subway scene next to it of, kind of working people having to get crammed and ride under the ground with exhorting advertisements around them while a rocket goes to the moon. Those are from these are mostly from the late 50s. As we get into the 60s, we see more stuff concerned with civil rights. A lot of black and white faces on the covers. This one I don't think is really directly concerned with civil rights, but I really like this image. It looks like sun reflecting through a fence, maybe of a church or a civil building, kind of like a dense iron fence. But also at a time when a lot of people are being arrested, it definitely has some connotations of jail cells. And then in the green here, you can kind of see just lightly sketched, looks like people marching.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful image.
Just a cover here about the attempts to integrate Ole Miss and Oxford, Mississippi in 1962, and there was a lot of bloodshed around that. And this is a real condemnation of, I think, white liberalism that is asking people to behave and go slowly and be gradual. And then just the last three I want to highlight here is a series from 1963. It's 3 successive covers as the civil rights struggle in Birmingham, Alabama. A long, hot summer of protests and increasing tension. In June 1963, this is a cover where she carves a flower with the word "now" here. And this is the first publication of Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. Had been published as a pamphlet before. This is, I guess, is the first widespread publication. I think maybe the Quakers published it first, or I could be wrong about that, but I believe that was who published it first. It's a lovely and odd cover, and you can see the wood grain here. I mean, it's just very tactile and hand done feel. Following that, we see the word "now" continued in these crowds of people protesting this increasing urgency about civil rights. And then the final one in this series is after the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. And the "now" has now turned into what to me looks like flames and embers. And in that bombing, 4 girls were killed who were at Sunday school in the basement, and a number of people were injured. And this is kind of like in the mid-period, and then as we go along, there are other civil rights covers. I said she breaks out of the political patterns. I mean, these are kind of in the midst of all that. She has lots of stuff about nature, which I think, as we talked about, it was not her habitat growing up. And she was living rurally at the Gate Hill commune.
Right.
I think these are very lovely. And as we go on, the covers increasingly become about the growing war in Vietnam. This is fairly early in that process. Mid 1960s, 1965 was really when a lot of the Vietnam covers occurred.
Totally. And it's interesting because we see a really wide variety of subject matters and figurative approaches in the covers. And sometimes they really are aligning with the textual content inside, but sometimes they're also just kind of their own thing and just Vera doing Vera.
Right, for sure. Yeah, a lot of times they're very directly related to whatever is kind of the lead article, and other times it's, yeah.
Is there any specific cover that you'd like to highlight? Maybe that was a kind of point in your research that you focused on, or something that kind of tells the story?
I don't know. I feel like it kind of covered some of the big ones for me. I mean, this is, it's such a great cover. Just the giant bar of black there. Another look at Cuba. I mean, there's just some, I think, formally very brave choices here. And I think, I think she had total freedom to do what they want, a lot of trust, and I think, had a good working relationship with the editorial committee. I mean, to propose just a black cover like this on 1962 for a cover article about Cuba, I can see people balking at that. And she had, some great covers, in my opinion, a couple ones that didn't work, but she did have the ability to experiment and kind of go forward. And I think in the article in Signal, we just kind of note the last run of covers she did about Vietnam were all based on this one photo of a mother and her child in Vietnam. And she uses the face there in a number of kind of, strange collages. Each one with kind of a different vibe to it. So, this one felt that, the kind of specter of death and war and imperialism was kind of hanging over an American city, and it's symbolized by this face kind of hanging in the sky like a moon. This one is kind of ethereal, and just the washed out effect is haunting, I guess I would say. Some weird collage work here mixed with fashion ads. These, I think, are dates of intervention that happened in Vietnam. Let's see boots crushing the same face here, and the face existing like seeds on a plant that's growing. The face cut in here with children protesting the war. Odd choices and kind of an odd series. I think it's 10 or 11 issues there, and I don't always know what to think about it. I think it's powerful, and it becomes kind of more interesting the more you see them in series and with each other.
Absolutely. And so if you wanted at this point, we can transition to talk a little bit about what Vera did after Liberation magazine. So can you tell us a little bit about the final run of the project, and a little bit about what Vera went on to do, and kind of continuing to work as an activist for the rest of her life?
Sure. So once again, speaking on some conditional authority, she had stopped in 1967, I believe, was her last covers, and that was that kind of Vietnam series. She was still credited for a number of covers after that, but they were just photographs, and I don't think she did the photographs. She may have picked them, and then she stopped really doing it then. Liberation, I'll just give a spur at that point. A lot of the original editorial committee were gone by that point. A.J. Musty, Bayard Rustin, I believe Dave Dillinger all had moved away. Paul Goodman took over in the later part. And I think Liberation became a little more conventional magazine, kind of trying to reorient towards the new left and the youth political counterculture and subculture,
Right.
and still being very political. In one way, it became a less interesting magazine because of that, even though I think it helped kind of seed that movement and provided a one of the few models of that, I guess, more less labor-based, but also more holistic view of kind of liberatory living and I'm not quite sure how to phrase that. Anyway, so Vera did leave doing the magazine at that point. She was still raising children at Gatehill, and I'm not totally sure. She was helping with the school there and with the structure of the school, and then I'm not totally sure how she moved into doing children's literature, whether that crossed over or if that developed later. I believe her first published stories were, do you know when the dates were?
I don't know the exact dates, but I believe it was later that she kind of embarked on her career,
Right.
and the kind of body of work that people know today as her
Yeah.
children's books. But what's also interesting to note and is really cool, actually, maybe I can put up a scan right here of an article that we're showing in the exhibition. Vera was interested in illustration and graphic illustration specifically for children's book, actually all her life, ever since she was young. So there's actually a textual source of her from her time at Black Mountain, which, by the way, I believe she was only 17 years old when she started going to school there, and kind of saying that she was interested in writing children's literature and drawing. So it's really interesting that she kind of came back to that eventually. And it was always, I think, a part of her graphic style, this kind of real love for and passion for protecting children from these very, kind of injustices that were part of the political motivation, and really the role that children figure in war and in oppression. So I think that you kind of see that coming into the covers a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think in that interview with Connie Bostic about her time at Black Mountain, she does talk very appreciatingly about the kind of sense of play and wonder she was allowed to have at Black Mountain. And I think that also kind of inhabits, even through her covers with Liberation, that, she was trying to inhabit the same kind of sense of freedom and play that kids would have in making stuff. So I definitely, it's a connected thread. And also, like, I think a deliberate choice as an adult to keep trying to engage with that sense of play and wonder with the world. It's not easy to do as you grow older. She did a great job. So I think she started making kids books in the early 80s. I could be wrong. It could be in the 70s. She had moved out of Gatehill, worked in some schools in Canada, maybe lived on a houseboat up there with her kids. Not totally sure about the exactness of that, but she did move back to the US in the early 80s as well. And she had been involved with the War Resisters League kind of throughout. I mean, not just as Liberation as a project, but as a political project. She had been an activist within that group. And when she came back, she certainly continued to be involved. She was on, I believe, a steering committee. She helped organize the calendars. She went on some very high-profile marches and was arrested in some civil disobedience actions. She collaborated with Grace Paley, the author, on a book, who was also a peace activist as well. All that kind of stuff was going on. And there's, the ties back to the Liberation Group were ongoing. Igal Rodenko, who I said was the printer, who was also in the Journey of Reconciliation, was on the War Resisters League Executive Committee, I think, in the 70s and maybe up into the 80s. So a lot of these, I think, relationships had been seeded very early and had a 30, 40-year run. Political, supportive, artistic. Yeah.
Totally. Well, this is a great kind of bridge into our final question. I was just going to ask how you kind of see the history of this project, Liberation Magazine, this mid-century project, kind of continuing into the present day and maybe even becoming increasingly kind of relevant.
Liberation's kind of a marginal history. I think deeply influential, and I think the further you go into it, you see, it was an early spot for so many writers and luminaries. So noted Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail was first there, but I mean also early writings by James Baldwin, Kenneth Patchen, Kenneth Rex Roth, Dorothy Day wrote for it. I mean, the list of people that were, allowed to write for it or wrote for it, contributed to it, is really deep and impressive. So I think it's one of those things that exists probably, it's probably more influential than it is well known. I think it helped give a platform for a lot of thoughts. Definitely was an early platform for really radical, non-violent, direct action, which, of course, was a huge element of kind of the mainline civil rights movement in the South. But history is, I guess, only valuable when it's remembered. And I didn't, at least when I started doing this, which was probably started researching this article, it's 4 or 5 years ago. Stuff about liberation was tucked away in peace archives at Swarthmore College, and there was a handful of issues here and there that we'd found. A lot of that stuff is becoming increasingly digitized. There's the Vera Williams show that you have going right now. War Resisters League right now is also celebrating, I think, its 100-year anniversary. So some of this stuff is kind of percolating up. So I think it's only as relevant as we make it. I think if you do look into it, I think what is relevant about liberation as a project was its kind of far-reaching scope of ideas, its openness to both more cultural, people doing cultural work and experimentation, as well as doing some real hardline political thought and strategizing. And as I said, I think their trust in allowing Vera Williams to experiment on these covers is something you don't really see a lot with publications, especially ones that run as long as this. And I think it's a good model for political organizing to allow things that don't look conventionally digestible, for example, or maybe require 1 or 2 glances or a little greater context, or just some confusion or wonder or playfulness. All those things I think can be missing from political organizing work when people do graphics. And I think for artists also, it's a nice model of showing how someone was able to kind of play and experiment, but also engage with the issues of their time in a way that was sincere and honest and, to my eyes, compelling.
Thank you so much, Alec, for being here with me today and chatting with me. And I'm really excited to just be able to share this with everyone to learn more about Liberation Magazine and about Vera Williams. If you would like listeners to continue exploring the life of Vera B. Williams, you can learn more by reading Alec's article, which again is called Hope in the Midst of Apathy, and it's published in Signal Magazine 08. You can also watch the oral history video with Vera Baker Williams that we mentioned, recorded in 2008, and that's on our museum website. You can go to the exhibition page for Vera Williams stories, or you can look on our YouTube and Vimeo at our oral history playlist. And finally, to see other conversations with scholars and artists about the history of Black Mountain College, please check out our Perspective series on YouTube and Vimeo, where you can see a lot of different talks, sort of like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Alec, for being here.
Thanks.